You ever have that moment where life throws a curveball so absurd, so utterly baffling, that all you can do is stare blankly and wonder if you accidentally wandered onto the set of a particularly poorly written sitcom? Well, I had one of those, and it involved an HOA president, my own house, and a 911 call that probably deserves its own plaque in the Hall of Fame for petty grievances. Drop a comment below if you've ever had the unique pleasure of dealing with an HOA board member who clearly missed their calling as a feudal lord, and definitely let me know where you're watching from, because you are not going to believe the sheer audacity involved in this story. Our HOA president, a woman we'll call Karen, because, let's face it, the sensible shoe of performative outrage fits her perfectly, apparently decided that the HOA bylaws granted her dominion over, well, everything, including the inside of my family's home while I was at work. The best part? When I, quite reasonably, asked her to vacate my property, she called 911, claiming I was the one causing trouble. The universe, however, has a wicked sense of humor, because the dispatcher who took that call was my own daughter, Chloe. Oh, the sweet, sweet irony. It all started, as these things often do, with small incursions. My name is Arthur, and I'm a forensic accountant. My life revolves around details, patterns, and the meticulous unraveling of tangled threads, usually financial ones. It's a skill set that, as it turns out, is surprisingly applicable to suburban warfare. We'd moved into this particular neighborhood about 3 years prior. It was pleasant enough, good schools, nice trees, the usual, and, of course, an homeowners association. I'd never been a huge fan of HOAs, always felt they were a breeding ground for busybodies with too much time on their hands, but the house was perfect for us, and the rules seemed reasonable on paper. The first year was uneventful. Then, Karen Henderson was elected HOA president. Karen drove a pearlescent white Cadillac Escalade that always seemed freshly detailed, even after a rainstorm, and she piloted it through our quiet streets with the imperious air of a monarch surveying her lands. Her wardrobe consisted mainly of what I could only describe as aggressive resort wear, brightly patterned caftans and chunky jewelry that seemed more appropriate for a Palm Springs poolside than a Tuesday morning in our Blake Springs poolside, 25. Distinctly non-tropical enclave. She had a way of looking down her nose at you even if she was shorter, a true talent. The initial warnings were minor, almost laughably so. A polite but firm email about my recycling bin being visible from the street for 3 hours too long on collection day. A passive-aggressive comment during a chance encounter at the mailbox about the precise shade of beige I'd chosen to repaint a window shutter. Apparently, it was more of an eggshell than the approved sandstone. I, being a man who prefers peace and quiet, and whose job involves navigating far more complex regulations, simply complied. I downloaded the HOA bylaws, a 50-page document written in the kind of dense legalese designed to numb the brain, and actually read them, cover to cover, twice. I highlighted relevant sections, cross-referenced clauses, even made a few notes in the margins. My wife, Sarah, thought I was going a bit overboard. "It's just Karen," she'd said. "She'll find someone else to bother eventually. If only." You see, Karen didn't just bother, she probed. She was testing boundaries, seeing how far her self-perceived authority could stretch. The bylaws, I noted, were surprisingly vague on the HOA's right to inspect properties, mostly referring to common areas and external appearances visible from the street. There was a clause about emergency repairs, but that clearly didn't apply to the color of my mailbox flag. The escalation was gradual, insidious. Neighbors started murmuring about Karen peering over fences, walking onto driveways to get a closer look at flower beds she deemed non-compliant. One poor fellow, Mr. Henderson, from down the street, no relation, thankfully for him, got a violation notice because his garden gnome was, and I quote, "of a whimsical nature not in keeping with the community's aesthetic standards." The gnome had been there for 10 years. It was around this time I decided to upgrade our home security. I already had a basic system, but I invested in a more comprehensive setup. High-definition cameras covering all approaches to the house, the backyard, the driveway, even one discreetly aimed down the side access. Motion-activated, night vision, cloud storage, the works. As a forensic accountant, I believe in documentation. Little did I know how crucial that belief would become. Karen, of course, noticed the new cameras. She even made a comment to Sarah in the grocery store about how some people seem to have a lot to hide. The irony was apparently lost on her. The prelude to the main event, the inspection as she later termed it, was a series of increasingly pointed but ultimately hollow complaints. She accused us of running a business from home because my son's band practiced in the garage twice a week. The bylaws were silent on garage bands. She claimed our dog barked excessively, despite our mutt, Buster, being a geriatric creature whose loudest vocalization was a contented snore. Each time, I'd respond politely via email, citing the relevant bylaw, or lack thereof, and, where applicable, offering easily verifiable evidence to the contrary, like the band's very limited practice schedule, or Buster's veterinarian records confirming his advanced age and placid nature. Each response from me seemed to fuel her frustration, her escalade making just a few more slow, deliberate passes by our house each week. I could almost feel her gaze trying to burn through the walls, searching for that one elusive violation that would give her the satisfaction she so clearly craved. She was a woman on a mission, and that mission, it seemed, was to make my life, and the lives of anyone who didn't immediately kowtow to her imagined authority, as difficult as possible. The stage was being set, not for a simple disagreement, but for a full-blown confrontation that would expose Karen's petty tyranny in the most public and, for her, humiliating way imaginable. And it all hinged on her belief that she could just walk into my house. The day it all came to a head was a Tuesday. I was at my office downtown, buried in spreadsheets and trying to decipher the labyrinthine financial dealings of a company suspected of some rather creative accounting. Sarah was out of town visiting her sister. My eldest, Chloe, who was 22 and working as a 911 dispatcher to save up for her master's program, had a late shift that day, not due to start until 3 p.m. My youngest, Tom, was at high school. The house should have been empty. Around 1:30 p.m. my phone buzzed with an alert from my security system. Motion detected. Living room. My heart did a little jolt. That was impossible. No one was supposed to be home. I immediately pulled up the live feed on my work computer, my fingers suddenly slick, and there she was, Karen Henderson, in my living room. She wasn't just peeking in a window. She was inside, bold as brass, wearing a particularly garish turquoise caftan, her oversized sunglasses perched on her head like a bizarre tiara. She was slowly pacing, peering at photographs on the mantelpiece, running a finger along a bookshelf. It was surreal. My first instinct was pure, unadulterated rage. How dare she? My second was a cold, forensic calm. This was evidence. This was a flagrant, undeniable trespass. I minimized the live feed for a second, my mind racing. I needed to act fast, but also smart. My first call was to Chloe. Her phone rang twice before she picked up, her voice a little sleepy. She'd clearly been napping before her shift. "Hey Dad, what's up?" I kept my voice level. "Chloe, listen carefully. Someone is inside the house. It's Karen Henderson, the HOA president." There was a pause. "What? Inside? How?" she asked, suddenly wide awake. "I don't know how she got in yet. I'm watching her on the security feed right now. She's just snooping. Are you home?" "No, I was about to leave for my shift. I may be 10 minutes away." "Okay. New plan," I said. "Forget your shift for a moment. I need you to go home, immediately. Do not confront her if she seems aggressive or unstable. Just observe, be a witness. If she's still there when you arrive, call the police. I'm leaving work now, but you'll get there much faster. Keep your phone on." "Got it, Dad." "On my way." She sounded surprisingly composed, a testament, I suppose, to her dispatcher training kicking in. I hung up and immediately started packing my briefcase, informing my bewildered secretary I had a home emergency. The drive home felt like an eternity, my mind replaying the image of Karen Henderson casually inspecting my personal belongings as if she were browsing in a department store. What on earth could have possessed her? What was her justification? Had she found a door unlocked? The back gate was usually latched, the doors always locked. Unless, had she actually picked a lock? The thought sent a fresh wave of anger through me. Chloe called me back about 7 minutes later, her voice low and urgent. "Dad, I'm here, I just walked in. She's in the kitchen now. She nearly jumped out of her skin when she saw me. Is she being aggressive? I asked, gripping the steering wheel. Not yet, just flustered. She's trying to say she's doing an official HOA property wellness check because she smelled something concerning from the street. Total bull, Dad. The house smells like old coffee and the cinnamon candles Sarah lit yesterday. I could hear the dry sarcasm in Chloe's voice, a trait she definitely inherited from her mother. Good girl, I said. Start recording on your phone, discreetly if you can. Tell her she's trespassing and needs to leave immediately. I'm about 5 minutes out. Already recording, Chloe confirmed. Okay, here I go. I could hear muffled voices in the background, Chloe's calm, firm tone, and then Karen's, rising in pitch, indignant and blustering. Absolutely have the right concerns for community standards. This is an official capacity. Karen was clearly trying to intimidate Chloe, to steamroll her with jargon and a sense of authority she didn't possess. But Chloe wasn't just any 22-year-old. She was used to dealing with panicked, irrational, and sometimes dangerous people over the phone. She knew how to de-escalate, but also how to stand her ground. I pictured her, calm and resolute, phone held steady, while Karen, in her turquoise caftan, flapped and squawked like an exotic bird caught somewhere it shouldn't be. The thought almost made me smile, despite the simmering anger. This wasn't just an HOA dispute anymore. This was breaking and entering, or at the very least, criminal trespass. And Karen Henderson, our self-appointed queen of the cul-de-sac, had just handed me all the evidence I would ever need, gift-wrapped. I pulled into my driveway at a speed that probably violated several local ordinances, my tires squealing slightly on the concrete. The front door was open, and I could see Chloe standing just inside, arms crossed, looking remarkably unfazed. Karen Henderson was on my porch, her face flushed a blotchy red that clashed spectacularly with her turquoise attire. She was mid-rant, gesticulating wildly with one hand while clutching her enormous handbag with the other. Utterly disrespectful. I am trying to uphold the standards of this community, young lady, and you have no right to interfere with official HOA business. She was screeching, loud enough for the Hendersons across the street, the gnome-loving ones, to peer curiously from their window. Chloe just looked at her, then saw me striding up the walkway, and gave a small, almost imperceptible nod. Relief washed over me. Chloe was okay. Now it was my turn. Mrs. Henderson, I said, my voice calm but carrying an edge of cold steel I usually reserve for uncooperative CFOs. What exactly do you think you're doing? Karen whirled around, momentarily startled. Her eyes, magnified by her designer sunglasses which she'd now put on, narrowed when she saw me. Arthur, finally. Your daughter has been incredibly rude and obstructive. I was performing a necessary property inspection, as is my right and duty as HOA president. My right and duty? I repeated, stepping onto the porch so I was now between Karen and my front door. Mrs. Henderson, let me be perfectly clear. You entered my home without permission. That is not a right or a duty. That is called trespassing. My security cameras have recorded your entire unauthorized tour of my living room and kitchen, and my daughter, I gestured to Chloe, who was still calmly recording with her phone, has recorded your subsequent refusal to leave when asked. Karen's jaw tightened. The flush on her cheeks deepened. For a moment, I thought she might actually try to push past me. I had reason to believe there was a violation. She insisted, her voice shrill. I smelled an unapproved chemical odor. It could have been a hazard. An unapproved chemical odor? I arched an eyebrow. Mrs. Henderson, the only hazard here is your profound misunderstanding of both the law and common decency. You are on private property, uninvited, and you have been asked to leave. You need to do so now. I kept my tone even, but firm. I wasn't shouting, wasn't threatening, just stating facts. Forensic accounting teaches you that the truth, presented clearly and dispassionately, is often the most powerful weapon. Karen, however, was not accustomed to being contradicted, especially not by a mere resident. Her face contorted with outrage. You can't speak to me like that, she shrieked, jabbing a finger in my direction. I am the HOA. I will have you fined. I will have you sanctioned. This entire street will hear about your belligerence. She was practically vibrating with fury. And then, in a move of such spectacular self-sabotage that I almost had to admire its sheer audacity, she snatched her oversized smartphone from her handbag, its diamond-encrusted case glinting in the afternoon sun, and dramatically stabbed at the screen. "That's it, I'm calling the police, you are harassing me. You are threatening an HOA official in the performance of her duties." And with that, she actually dialed 911. Standing on my porch after breaking into my house, she called the cops on me. The sheer, unmitigated gall of it was breathtaking. I glanced at Chloe. Her eyes widened almost imperceptibly, and a tiny smile, quickly suppressed, played on her lips. She knew, I knew. Karen Henderson, in her infinite arrogance, had no idea who was about to answer her call. The next few moments were pure, unadulterated theater of the absurd. Karen, phone pressed to her ear, paced my small front porch like a caged tigress, her voice a torrent of exaggerated victimhood. "Yes, I need police assistance immediately," she declared, loud enough for the entire cul-de-sac to be privy to her drama. "I am at 124 Willow Creek Lane. I am the HOA president, Karen Henderson, and I am being harassed and threatened by the resident, Arthur, my last name. He's being aggressive and preventing me from carrying out my official duties. I fear for my safety." I just stood there, leaning against the doorframe, arms crossed, watching this performance with a kind of detached fascination. Chloe had moved to stand beside me, her own phone still recording Karen's every word and gesture. The irony was so thick you could have spread it on toast. My daughter, Chloe, had indeed just started her shift at the County Emergency Dispatch Center. As I found out later, she'd logged in, headset on, ready for the usual afternoon fare of minor fender benders and noise complaints. And then, the call came through. Her own address. Her own father's name being cited as an aggressor. She told me later her heart did a little leap, not of fear, but of a strange, almost giddy anticipation. She recognized Karen's distinctive, somewhat screechy voice instantly. With professional poise that made me incredibly proud, Chloe took the call. 911, what is the address of your emergency?" she'd asked, her voice calm and even, betraying none of the internal fireworks. Karen, oblivious, rattled off our address again. "And what is the nature of the emergency, ma'am?" Chloe continued, typing rapidly. Karen launched into her tirade again, painting herself as the beleaguered official, bravely facing down a hostile homeowner. Chloe, meanwhile, was carefully logging every accusation, every dramatic sigh, every feigned tremor in Karen's voice. She asked clarifying questions, the kind dispatchers are trained to ask, but with a subtle precision that would, in retrospect, be devastating for Karen's credibility. "So, to be clear, ma'am, you were on Mr. My Last Name's property when this alleged harassment occurred." A slight pause from Karen. "Well, yes, I was conducting an inspection." "And was this an internal inspection of the residence, ma'am?" Chloe pressed, her tone perfectly neutral. "Yes, as is my right," Karen huffed. "And did Mr. My Last Name ask you to leave his property?" "He was extremely aggressive about it," Karen shrieked, conveniently sidestepping the direct question of whether she was asked to leave before any alleged aggression. Chloe diligently noted it all. She then dispatched a unit, as protocol dictated, informing them of a dispute at the address, noting the complainant was the HOA president alleging harassment by the resident. She didn't add any personal commentary, of course. She didn't need to. The beauty of it was that Karen was doing all the work herself, digging her own hole with every self-righteous pronouncement, all while my daughter, the very picture of calm professionalism, took notes from the other end of the line. I could only imagine Chloe's internal monologue, a mixture of disbelief, amusement, and probably a touch of that same righteous indignation I was feeling. The universe, it seemed, was not without a sense of comedic justice. About 10 minutes later, which felt like an hour of Karen continuing to mutter about disrespect and violations while pacing back and forth on my lawn, she'd finally moved off the porch. Perhaps sensing she'd overstayed her welcome there, a patrol car rolled up to the curb. 2 officers, looking remarkably stoic given the nature of HOA disputes they probably dealt with regularly, emerged. Karen immediately zeroed in on them like a heat-seeking missile. "Officers, thank goodness you're here. This man," she pointed dramatically at me, has been completely uncooperative and threatening. This was going to be interesting. The officers, a man and a woman who looked like they'd seen it all and were generally unimpressed by most of it, approached cautiously. Officer Miller, the taller of the two, addressed Karen first, as she was the one who initiated the call and was currently holding court on my lawn with the fervor of a street preacher. "Ma'am, can you tell us what happened?" Karen launched into her well-rehearsed spiel. She was the HOA president, performing a vital, albeit unspecified, property wellness check due to serious concerns. She'd been met with hostility and aggression from me, and obstruction from my clearly misinformed daughter. She even implied I might have lunged at her. A detail notably absent from her earlier tirade, but one she clearly felt added a nice touch of peril to her narrative. She demanded that I be formally warned, cited, perhaps even taken away in handcuffs for interfering with an HOA official. She gestured vaguely towards my house, as if it were a den of iniquity I was fiercely protecting. Throughout her performance, Officer Miller and his partner, Officer Davies, listened patiently, their expressions unreadable. I've dealt with law enforcement in professional capacities before. They have world-class poker faces. When Karen finally wound down, pausing for breath and looking expectantly at the officers, as if awaiting applause and immediate action, Officer Miller turned to me. "Sir, your side of the story." I kept my voice calm and factual. "Officers, good afternoon. I'm Arthur, my last name, and this is my home. About an hour ago, I received a security alert on my phone showing this woman, Mrs. Karen Henderson, inside my living room. My daughter, Chloe," I gestured to her, "arrived home shortly after and found Mrs. Henderson in our kitchen. Mrs. Henderson claimed to be conducting an HOA inspection. Chloe informed her she was trespassing and asked her to leave. I arrived home a few minutes later and reiterated that Mrs. Forteenheim Henderson was trespassing and needed to vacate my property immediately. When she refused and became belligerent, she decided to call you." I paused, then added, "I have security footage of Mrs. Henderson inside my house, without any prior notification or permission. And my daughter has video footage of our subsequent interaction on the porch, where she was repeatedly asked to leave before she made her call to 911. "We'd be happy to show you." Officer Davies raised an eyebrow almost imperceptibly. "You have footage of her inside your home?" she asked. "Yes, ma'am," I confirmed, clear as day. "Wandering through my living room and kitchen," Karen sputtered. "I had reasonable cause. I smelled something." "Smelled what, exactly, Mrs. Henderson?" Officer Miller asked, his tone still neutral, but with a hint of something that might have been weariness. Karen flailed for a moment. "It was a chemical smell, a dangerous chemical. I was concerned for the structural integrity of the neighborhood." This was a new one. From unapproved aesthetics to structural integrity of the neighborhood, via a phantom chemical smell. Her narrative was evolving at an impressive, if desperate, pace. Officer Davies looked at Karen, then back at me. "Sir, would you be willing to show us that footage?" "Absolutely," I said. "Chloe, can you bring up the living room camera feed on your tablet?" While Chloe went inside to grab her tablet, Officer Miller addressed Karen again. "Ma'am, HOA bylaws generally cover exterior maintenance and common areas. They typically do not grant an HOA representative the right to enter a private residence without explicit homeowner consent or a court order, regardless of any suspected smells, unless it's a documented, immediate emergency like a fire or major flood actively damaging other properties, which doesn't appear to be the case here." Karen's face began to pale slightly beneath her aggressive tan. "But the bylaws state we can inspect for compliance." "Compliance with what, ma'am?" Officer Miller pressed gently. "And does it specify unannounced, uninvited entry into a locked home?" Chloe returned with the tablet and quickly queued up the footage. There was Karen, clear as day, wandering through my living room, peering at family photos, even briefly picking up a small decorative box from a side table before putting it down. Then, the footage of her in the kitchen, startled by Chloe's arrival. The officers watched intently. Then Chloe played her phone recording of the porch interaction, Karen's voice rising in indignation, her claims of official business, and Chloe and I repeatedly telling her she needed to leave the property. The final flourish was Karen, red-faced and furious, declaring she was calling 911. Officer Miller looked from the tablet to Karen, whose bravado was visibly deflating. "Mrs. Henderson," he said, his voice now distinctly firmer. "Based on what we've seen and heard, it appears you entered this residence without permission, and when asked to leave private property, you refused, and then called emergency services under what seems to be false pretenses, claiming harassment when you were, in fact, the party who was trespassing." Karen opened her mouth, then closed it. The fight seemed to drain out of her, leaving behind a woman who suddenly looked less like a monarch and more like a deflated parade float. "But, my duties," she whispered. "Your duties do not extend to violating state law, ma'am," Officer Davies said quietly but firmly. "Trespassing is a serious matter. And misusing the 911 system diverts resources from genuine emergencies." They didn't arrest her, though technically, they probably could have for the trespass if I'd pressed it right then and there. Instead, they gave her a very stern, very public lecture about property rights, the limits of HOA authority, and the appropriate use of emergency services. They took down her information, and mine, and Chloe's as a witness. They informed Karen that a report would be filed. I could see Mr. WWWW. Henderson across the street practically glued to his window, no doubt enjoying the downfall of the gnome-hating tyrant. Several other neighbors had also emerged, drawn by the commotion and the presence of the police car, and were now watching with undisguised interest. Karen's reign of petty terror was, it seemed, suffering a very public and very embarrassing setback. As the officers concluded, they suggested to Karen that she leave the premises immediately and confine future HOA business to official, pre-arranged channels, preferably in writing. Humiliated, her turquoise caftan now looking rather wilted, Karen Henderson finally turned and slunk back to her gleaming white Escalade, not meeting anyone's eye. She didn't even attempt her usual imperious departure, just got in and drove away with uncharacteristic quietness. The officers gave me a nod. "Have a good day, sir, and ma'am," addressing Chloe. "Thanks for your clear documentation." As they walked back to their car, I allowed myself a small, satisfied smile. Karen had called 911, expecting to put me in my place. Instead, she dialed directly into her own public humiliation, professionally managed by my own daughter. You couldn't write this stuff. But this wasn't just about one afternoon's victory. This was about accountability. And I, Arthur, forensic accountant, was very, very good at ensuring accountability. Karen Henderson had no idea what was coming next. The immediate aftermath was, to put it mildly, deeply satisfying. As Karen's Escalade retreated down Willow Creek Lane, a small spontaneous ripple of applause seemed to emanate from a couple of the neighboring houses. Miss Henderson, the gnome aficionado, actually gave me a thumbs up from his porch. Word of Karen's spectacular cell phone spread through the neighborhood like wildfire in a dry California canyon. Chloe, once the officers had departed, finally let out a whoop of laughter. "Dad, that was epic. Did you see her face when Officer Miller laid down the law? Priceless." We went inside, and I immediately backed up all the security footage from the house cameras and Chloe's phone onto multiple hard drives. As a forensic accountant, I have a deep appreciation for redundant backups of crucial evidence. The first thing I did the next morning was file a formal request for the audio recording of Karen's 911 call. Public records are a beautiful thing. When it arrived a few days later, it was even better than I remembered. Hearing Chloe's crisp professional dispatcher voice methodically taking down Karen's increasingly unhinged and fabricated accusations was pure gold. The contrast was stark. Karen, hysterical and self-important. Chloe, calm, collected, and just doing her job, albeit with a delicious undercurrent of irony only we knew about. My next step was to consult with a lawyer. Not just any lawyer, but a sharp litigator named Miss Albright, who specialized in real estate and HOA disputes. I laid out the whole story for her, presenting my evidence. the crystal-clear security footage of Karen's unauthorized tour of my home, Chloe's phone recording of the confrontation, and the pièce de résistance, the official 911 call audio. Miss Albright listened intently, a slight smile playing on her lips as she reviewed the materials. "Mr. My last name," she said when I'd finished. "This is remarkably thorough. Mrs. Henderson has not only committed clear criminal trespass, but has also potentially engaged in making a false police report, and her actions demonstrate a profound abuse of her position as HOA president." She explained our options. We could press criminal charges for trespassing. We could file a civil suit for invasion of privacy and harassment. Or, we could use this mountain of evidence to achieve a more systemic change within the HOA itself. While the thought of dragging Karen through the courts had a certain appeal, my primary goal was to ensure this kind of abuse of power never happened again to anyone in our community. "What I want," I told Miss Albright, "is for Karen Henderson to be removed from the HOA board permanently. And I want clearer, more explicit rules in our bylaws about property access and the conduct of board members." Miss Albright nodded. "A very reasonable and achievable goal. We can draft a formal demand letter to the HOA board, outlining Mrs. Henderson's egregious misconduct, supported by this evidence, and request her immediate removal. We can also propose amendments to the bylaws. Given the strength of your evidence, particularly the trespass and the misuse of emergency services, I suspect the board will be highly motivated to comply to avoid further legal exposure and public scandal." And so, Operation HOA Takedown commenced. Miss Albright drafted a blistering, yet impeccably professional, letter. It detailed Karen's actions on that Tuesday afternoon, citing specific statutes regarding trespass and false reporting. It included stills from the security footage, a transcript of the most damning parts of Chloe's recording, and, crucially, a transcript of the 911 call, highlighting Karen's false claims versus Chloe's professional handling. The letter formally demanded Karen Henderson's immediate resignation or removal from the HOA board and from any position of authority within the community. It also proposed a special meeting to discuss amendments to the bylaws regarding board conduct, inspection protocols, requiring written notice and explicit homeowner consent for any non-emergency interior access, and grievance procedures. Copies of this letter, along with a summary of the evidence, excluding the full video initially, to hold something in reserve, were sent via certified mail to every member of the HOA board, including, of course, Karen Henderson herself. We also sent a polite, factual, informational letter to every household in the HOA, briefly outlining that a serious incident involving an abuse of authority by the HOA president had occurred, that evidence had been gathered, and that we were formally petitioning the board for corrective action and reforms to protect all residents. We didn't release the salacious details to the whole neighborhood initially, just the fact of the incident and our actions. The ball was now in the HOA board's court. The other board members, a mostly passive group who had largely let Karen run rampant, were suddenly faced with a well-documented crisis that threatened to engulf them all in legal trouble and public embarrassment. Their usual inertia was no match for the carefully constructed case I'd presented. The silence from Karen, after the letter was delivered, was deafening. Her escalade was notably absent from its usual prowling roots. The neighborhood held its breath. The HOA board convened an emergency meeting within a week, Miss Albright and I attended. Karen was there, looking pale and drawn, her usual vibrant attire replaced by a subdued beige pantsuit that seemed to drain all color from her face. She was accompanied by her own lawyer, a flustered-looking man who seemed acutely aware he was holding a very bad hand. The other board members, a retired dentist, a stay-at-home mom who mostly volunteered for the social committee, and a quiet software engineer, looked deeply uncomfortable. Our presentation was concise and irrefutable. We played short key clips of the security footage. We played a segment of the 9/11 call. The faces of the other board members went from uncomfortable to horrified. Karen's lawyer attempted a few weak arguments about misunderstandings and overzealousness in her duties, but it was like trying to stop a freight train with a feather duster. The evidence was simply overwhelming. The implicit threat of a very public lawsuit, not to mention potential criminal charges if I chose to pursue them with the DA, hung heavy in the air. The board went into a closed session. Miss Albright and I waited in the hallway. It didn't take long. Less than 30 minutes later, the board treasurer, the retired dentist, emerged, looking grave. He announced that, in light of the evidence presented, the board had unanimously voted to request Karen Henderson's immediate resignation as president and as a member of the board. If she refused, they would move for her formal removal under the existing, though rarely used, impeachment clauses in the bylaws. Furthermore, they agreed to schedule a special community meeting within 30 days to discuss and vote on the bylaw amendments we had proposed regarding property access, board conduct, and accountability. Karen, defeated and visibly shaken, tendered her resignation on the spot. There were no histrionics this time, no defiant speeches, just a quiet signature on a piece of paper. Her reign was over. The relief in the community was palpable. It turned out many residents had their own stories of Karen's petty tyrannies, but had felt powerless to act or feared her vindictiveness. My actions, and the spectacular way Karen had engineered her own downfall, had galvanized them. At the special community meeting a month later, the proposed bylaw amendments passed with overwhelming support. We now had clear, unambiguous rules preventing HOA board members from entering private property without 48-hour written notice and explicit, written homeowner consent, except in cases of demonstrable, immediate peril like fire or flood, verified by emergency services. We also instituted a code of conduct for board members and a clearer process for addressing grievances against them. In the end, Karen Henderson sold her house and moved out of the neighborhood about 6 months later. Her pearlescent white Escalade was last seen heading towards a state known for its lack of HOAs. Our neighborhood became a much more relaxed and genuinely friendly place. The new HOA board, led by the sensible, gnome-loving Mr. Henderson, who was reluctantly drafted into the role, focused on actual community improvement and maintenance, not on persecuting residents over the shade of their shutters or the whimsy of their garden decor. Chloe, of course, became something of a local legend, the dispatcher who professionally booked her own mother's tormentor. She used the story in her application essay for her master's program in crisis management, and got in. She said it was a prime example of de-escalation and unintended consequences. As for me, I went back to my spreadsheets and financial puzzles, but with a renewed appreciation for the importance of clear rules, good evidence, and the occasional perfectly timed dose of ironic justice. Sometimes, the most complex problems have surprisingly simple solutions, especially when your opponent is arrogant enough to call 911 on themselves straight into the waiting headset of your own daughter. So, that's how our HOA Karen dialed her way into an epic takedown. It just goes to show, you never know when your specialized skills, or your family's, will come in handy in the most unexpected ways. What's the craziest thing an HOA has ever tried to pull in your neighborhood? Let me know in the comments down below. And if you enjoyed this tale of entitlement getting its comeuppance, be sure to hit that like button and subscribe for more stories. You never know what kind of suburban showdown I might get caught up in next.